second, go live, click. And I think we are good to go. Awesome.
Fantastic. Well, good evening to everyone who's joining us for this conversation following Lighthouse live at the Playhouse. I'm Maria Murphy, and I am thrilled to be hosting this special Q&A where we can hear from the artists Maureen Batt and Grej Harrison, who are joined by Tania Breen and Michael Doherty, and who joined them in a performance this fall for a live production of Lighthouse, which of course was the winner of the ECMA Classical Recording of the Year this year, 2022. So I want to invite folks in the audience to ask questions or even share comments at any point during our conversation. You can post in the YouTube chat, and as I see them, I'll try and bring them into the conversation. But I thought I'd just get started with a few basic questions, mostly just about the transition from taking this from a studio recording project to a live concert, both conceptually and just logistically. So Grej, maybe we can start with you. Given that this was more of a studio produced album, how were you imagining this album for live performance? And then Maureen, perhaps you can jump in and share also how you were conceptualizing taking the album and translating your performance to the stage.
I think there was a bit of reverse engineering that had to happen to figure out how some of these parts would be performed. I think some of the movements sort of spoke for themselves, which were pretty simplified, had piano, voice, and not much other accompaniment. But other pieces like Pieces of You, I think we decided to kind of just build that one up from scratch again, rather than try to recreate exactly what was on the album. I think there was some flexibility in terms of direction, and I think it was really important who we had perform with us. So having Tania and Mike be able to wear many hats, and writing out a score for Tania to play pencil and paper was great, and Mike lending his expertise with electronics and synths and effects and stuff like that to help fill out some sounds.
Yeah, Maureen? When we were recording in April 2021, I remember thinking, okay, we've just added a fifth version of me singing this part. How is this ever going to work? Which, in the moment didn't matter, but I was just, before we even asked Tania and Mike, Grej and I knew instantaneously that's who we wanted to ask, and we were just really hoping they were going to want to join us and be available. And so I was exceptionally excited to have both of them be all of these other layers, so that we could all just do our favorite bits within the context of the layer. Well, sorry. So that I could do my favorite bits, somebody else could do a bit that was like in their best spot too.
Tania and Mike, maybe you can talk a little bit about, joining this project already in motion, but also clearly offering such important creative insights in the recreation of this project.
Oh, wow. Really exciting, little bit terrifying, out of my comfort zone. I had to read a score for pencil. Thank you, Grej. And a lot of freedom within the structure, which is also exciting and scary at the same time. And also, we really needed to do it justice, right? We were brought into this thing, and you have to honor kind of the lived experiences that we're exploring, but also the depth and the complexity of the music is beautiful. And so, it was really exciting and really scary and really fun. Yeah, and beautiful. Very moving experience. Yeah.
Mike?
And I had talked to Greg and Maureen a fair bit about this project before we got together, and I heard the record. And I mean, the good news for us was that the forms were all there, and they were really sound and strong, so that the four of us, we could just show up and be willing to, or the five of us, including me, I guess, show up and be willing to play within this form that was strong. And we weren't asking too many questions like what comes next, or so it was all very clear. And it gave us the freedom to be brave and to, you know, as Tania said, feel free to honor the lived experience of the real humans that we were exploring.
Totally. I'm wondering, and I know that Tom Belding, the art director of the project, isn't here tonight, but perhaps Greg or Maureen, you might be able to speak a little bit about the medium of the concert film. So not just the live performance, but what we were all experiencing tonight. If there was something that you were hoping for with, you know, putting this project on film, like what might be, you know, the particular affordances of film, or does that make it just more available to audiences you weren't able to reach, you know, beyond your Fredericton performance? Was there something that you were in particular going for with this, the medium of the concert film?
I'll start, Greg, and then hop in. I think from the get-go, it was Tom's goal and therefore our goal to have this be as universal an experience as possible. And video is a very, it's a very immediate and intimate medium. So it does afford that possibility of connection. And yes, the lived experiences of the people that we're talking about in the album, that's very important, but also, and Tom talked about this from conception of this project, that it would be relatable to anybody coming in. So that's something that has been so special for me in the development of this project and watching the concert film as it's come out, that it keeps morphing into whoever is in the soup.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think, you know, Tom Belding not only directed the film, but provided all the visual content that was projected on the screen for the performance. And I think by having a film, he was able to kind of bring some of those images more in the foreground and kind of have it I don't know, it was just like it you know, Tom's a filmmaker and a visual artist, and I think that was a way for him to kind of shine even more, which he did, I thought, very beautifully.
We have some fun questions already popping up in the chat. Maybe I'll start with James, who asks, I love the live version after listening to the album so many times. How much time were you able to be together before the performance?
I think we had 3 rehearsals. Is that right?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, we had 3 rehearsals at the Charlotte Street Art Center, which was great.
And I didn't do any preparation on Peace in My Life. 0%.
Yeah.
Just first time, nailed it.
Is that good?
It was 3 rehearsals, and then one day in the space at the Fredericton Playhouse, which it was very quick, like to feel a space, but also set up, sound check, rehearse, and then do a show. It's like, it's not super ideal, but like, man, it was a magical night. Like it really came together, you know.
We have a question from Allison about how much improvisation was included in the live performance. I can think of one part in particular, but I imagine maybe in those rehearsals you were also doing some improvisatory work to bring out, you know, what would end up being the version that you performed.
Yeah, I think even on the album there was, I don't know, I like to leave a lot of room for improv, and I think that was a way for me to allow Maureen to bring herself in a way into this project that doesn't feel like I'm leading all the time. And so I think for the performance, yeah, there was a lot of room for improv. And one particular piece, Love You Forever Plus a Day, we did a improvisatory live loop for that section, and yeah, it's like the ghost track on the album now. We'll have to release that someday.
Yeah, special bonus content.
Mm-hmm.
With the four of you together, I mean, it was in some ways very recognizable, like for me having like listened to the album a million times, but there were so many added like gorgeous colors and really rich textures. You know, we had the acoustic piano and another synth and more voices. And Tania, you were adding like additional percussive effects as well. I'm just wondering about like, what were we hearing that got added? And maybe some of the specifics about, I don't know, if you want to like get into some gear talk or just talk about what was being added to the textures that we were getting in this performance. Maybe Mike and Tania, we can hear like, what were you bringing in?
Well, I don't think it was possible to do all of the layers that were on the album, right? We'd need to be an army of people, but yeah, picking and choosing and playing. Probably, I think we listened to the album and used that as a jumping off point for things, but yeah, there were a lot of layers added. I have no idea how to answer that specifically.
Grej was already doing a lot of heavy lifting with all the programming and the live performance that he was doing on this in his work, and we talked about maybe me bringing one other synth of some kind and some effects units. And I went super old school and brought a Roland Juno 60 from 1982 and a Space Echo from, I don't know, sometime in the early 60s. And
Space Echo.
Yeah, the Space Echo. And a lot of the improvisational stuff was, for me at least, was in the spaces in between pieces. Mm-hmm. Where there was sort of the connective tissue between the pieces proper. But in terms of improvisation, again, it was so clear that what you bring of yourself is the interpretive part of it. So I guess that's what kind of puts it into a classical music genre, is that it's interpretation of somebody's piece rather than it being, there's nobody taking solos really. It's not that kind of improvisation. It's more of a bring yourself to the interpretation each time, and that can be different.
Yeah, sorry. And one thing that that became apparent, I think, quickly on in this process was, as Mike was saying, those transitions, which you don't really get to experience on the album, but in the space, I think logistically we needed time, and it's not the type of performance that we're speaking to the audience in between songs and introducing the band and all that stuff. So the transitions became this whole other kind of story. So I think bringing in just little soundscape things like wind chimes and rain stick and just kind of like organic textures that are kind of living in between those moments that kind of have some breath and lead us to the next part.
Funny, Grej, because that's kind of the element that for me moved it, like the way you encouraged a continual soundscape, it moved it into theater a little bit further, So it was beautiful. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I felt like once we had any idea what we were doing, and I know that might sound weird coming from the person who was one of two people on the album, but really it was like an entirely different project. It felt to me like an entirely different project. Like, okay, what am I going to be thinking about preparing for rehearsals? And it was kind of like very different from the process that I might be going through for other Western classical recording projects or performances, for instance, where you show up with everything learned and refined as best you can and that kind of thing. But just showing up and knowing that you have four people in a room, you trust everything they're going to try, And as soon as we had, the building blocks in place, I mean, it really just clicked and allowed for us to play. And it just never felt, for me, I don't know how it felt for everybody else, but I was never, even though I had no idea what it was or what it was going to be until we set foot in the Playhouse, I was never concerned. I knew it was going to be special.
We have a few other questions that have popped up in the chat. This one comes, I think it's Gregory, who writes, was there any link to traditional Western religious music? Some parts of the form felt cantata-like. At other times felt like the very best of Christian rock. I love Christian rock.
That's awesome. No. I don't.
Which part? So. No to which part?
To all the above. Traditional Western religion. No, I don't. Yeah, I didn't. I'll say no, but maybe subconsciously, yes. I mean, when Maureen and I were working on this album, I didn't compose anything in advance. We got into the studio together for 9 days and started there. So I didn't really have any idea of what we were going to make, or if it was just going to be one piece or a bunch of pieces. It was all kind of up in the air, but I can see that there are some hints of like traditional Western religious music, maybe, but not consciously. But that's interesting. I love that people find things in there, and it's great.
You know what my take on it is that I know you're really interested in minimalism, Greg, and as am I, and there's a lot of minimalism in EDM and Western popular music, and I think people can. What I love about it and why it's used so much in TV commercials and film music, that it doesn't say too much. It's not happy. It's not sad. It walks down the middle and provides some kind of bed for the audience to see themselves in something and feel something less specific than what the picture might be saying or what the text might be saying. And that's how I respond. It's minimalism for the most part. If I had to.
And spiritual, I think too, in there, where you can maybe direct. It's with minimalism, it's kind of choose your own adventure of like where you want to fill in those gaps with emotion or any sort of connotation. So I think the text deriving from entries, from the journal entries, and the grief journal entries, and I think there's a large part that's tied to it being very spiritual, maybe not tied to any particular religion, but I think there's a lot of room for interpretation there.
I think that resonates with a question from Laura, who asks, how are you able to sing while feeling all of these emotions? But I think, that could be spread across the board. How were you able to perform, like, given the kind of the intimate nature of this work?
I will say that it does not seem to be getting any easier. And not to go too far into, voice pedagogy and physiological geek land, although I'd be pleased to with anybody else at some other time. But the way that I was using my voice, it was strategic. And especially since the process was collaborative in creating the work to begin with, it was very strategic. Where am I going to use a lower range? Where am I going to use breathiness? And when am I going to be singing high, and what does that mean? And how does that feel? So it's still difficult. There's a few points where it still feels like there could be a couple surprises. Because you want it. This is I mean, Tania, you could probably talk about this for hours, that line of like being emotionally available and vulnerable on stage, but not so much so that you
lose your instrument.
Yeah, that you can't do what you want to do artistically.
Yeah.
It's also more interesting to watch that place, the precipice between somebody trying not to become too emotional and still having to tell the story, and go as Maureen just said, emotionally available, telling the story, but not fully breaking down, because it's, for me, for my money, it's far more interesting to watch somebody maneuver that as a human. That's sort of the yin yang between those two things, and we can push and pull a little bit between being emotional and then pulling back from that. So I think it's a technical exercise as well as a human one as a performer.
Yeah, I mean, Maureen, you know, watching you do that every night, it's obviously your training, but it's your performance training where you're able to feel and move through the emotions without tensing up, right? So you remain open to it. But I watched you every time we ran through it. Yeah, I mean, you were feeling it. You just remained open, right? So it didn't look painful, it looked cathartic, right? Yeah. But yeah, you just stayed open, you know? Yeah, but you were obviously feeling it.
Kind of hard not to.
Yeah.
This connects with another question from Jane on a similar topic, and also connects with something I wanted to ask you, Maureen. Jane writes, your voices blended so brilliantly. Maureen, as a classically trained opera singer, how challenging was it to produce the vocals in the way you did? It was so raw and beautiful. And I want to just kind of give a specific, to situate that question by thinking about Love You Forever Plus a Day, where I remember hearing you perform that in this live context and hearing, like, I don't know, maybe 30 different vocal colors. And also at that time when you're singing I Can Look Ahead, But I Want You With Me, and we hear just such a range of colors. And I also, you know, you're kind of like at a couple points, like really lagging behind the beat, like singing those phrases. And I just found it so impactful. So can you talk about those dramatic interpretations of and all of those vocal colors?
Yeah, I mean, rhythmically speaking, and therefore to speak to your question about interpretation and dramatic interpretation, Grej was very clear in advance that the timing would be weird, that it was allowed to be weird and crunchy and not comfortable, because this is not comfortable material. There's some really cool, warm and juicy and lovely things, but it's also not comfortable, and it's allowed to be messy like that. So timing wise, I was never, you know, Grej being the composer and coming up with these structures as we were working, it was like, the structure is even a bad word to use, because I felt complete freedom to just be in that moment. And then vocally, that relates, like, it's sort of like that piece in particular is quite low for me in terms of where I would often spend time singing as a Western classical singer, an Western opera singer. But it's the polar opposite, and it just feels like it's a natural place for that emotion and vulnerability. So, I mean, it could have been up the octave, but it would have sounded totally different. So I really wanted to stay somewhere low where people maybe are familiar with the terms head voice and chest voice, or thin vocal folds and thick vocal folds. And I wanted to be somewhere where I could play with the mix and the pressure and the volume, and therefore the colors that were coming out in that range.
I think what also I think allowed you, Maureen, to kind of explore a lot within that was, I mean, that piece is like as simple as it gets. It's 3 notes, and most of it is just on that C. And I think in writing that, it was a way to kind of emphasize sort of the paralysis of, like, going through these mantras of, after losing someone close. And it breaks out just slightly when you say, I want you with me. Mm-hmm. But I remember trying to notate the rhythm of those parts, and it was like, oh, I really like this rhythm, but I also like this one and this one. Okay, maybe they could all work together, but it'd be cool if sometimes that one's not even in there, and maybe just that one, so mm-hmm. It's like, okay, I'm just going to give you a bunch of note heads with no rhythm and just sing however you're feeling in that moment. And I love it because the performance that everyone got to hear tonight was so different than the album. How you latched on to certain phrases longer and dug really deep. It was quite amazing. And I think what's exciting is that every time you're going to tap into that in a different way that feels right in that moment.
I'd love to ask about a few specific moments in the performance. I heard a lot of people after the performance this fall talking about Dear Death, the performance of that piece, and just how impactful it was. Considering the origins of the project, inspired by the letters between Tom and his late wife, Ashley, who inspired this project. And, we're hearing her words. We see you, Maureen, writing in the kind of projection on the projection screen. Grej, we're getting that like really gripping rhythmic figure and the gesture of the ripping paper. And it's just this really emphatic moment in the performance. And also to me felt like a distinct kind of turning point in the show in terms of the kind of just dramatic pacing. So I was wondering maybe to bounce this to you, Grej, if you wanted to talk about the setup of that piece and maybe how the four of you were imagining that piece working dramatically.
Yeah, so Letter to Death, that's the movement that has the percussive pencil and paper, which in the studio I just sampled a bunch of just me writing and mapped it to a keyboard and kind of performed it that way. But for live, I was thinking it would be really great to have there be a visual connection to that sound. So when I asked Tania if she was okay with playing pencil and paper, it was a great avenue to explore, and instantly kind of realized that it's becoming a theater piece because, I could just have a clipboard. We could have clipboards on stage, that could have that sound that we need and have a mic there, but then it looks like we're auditing people, like, door to door or something. So so it became like, how does this work that makes it feel connected to what the message of the whole piece, and that's where, like, this is like 2 days before the show, and it's like, okay, we need desks, we need lamps, we need to be sitting, and now we're choreographing all of a sudden. So yeah, but it was great that we got there, and yeah, I don't know, a theater piece for that split moment. It was great.
Grej, do you hear any, I don't think I've ever asked you this, and perhaps influenced by the location that where you recorded in Parsboro, yeah? Parsboro, Nova Scotia?
Yeah.
You're surrounded by the ocean. And then was the title inspired by that, or was it something else with your text somewhere? But I hear a lot of Celtic music in the structures and the harmonies and the way that this music moves forward. Especially this piece, all those fifths.
Yeah, I think the Celtic side is something that comes out in a lot of pieces that I write. I don't think intentionally, but I think it's growing up in the East Coast and being surrounded by bagpipes in the summer during tourism season. And I'm a sucker for that harmony and those melodies. So I think that's definitely something that naturally comes out. And yeah, I think the waves, that was a conversation, between Tom, Maureen, and I. This concept of waves, symbolizing anxiety and emotions, and waves of emotion, and how water can, at times be very calming, but very dangerous and scary at the same time. And I think the more that we played with these, the concept of waves and how that works in the music and in the form, that kind of informed like the Lighthouse, the title, and sort of the beacon of the story. Yeah.
Well, all of you are from Fredericton, including Tom. And so I'm just wondering, what was it like to, share this project in your hometown? Like, clearly it was important to bring it to Fredericton and work with a bunch of Frederictonians.
I mean, that's not the only reason that we asked Mike and Tania to join us.
Obviously, yeah.
It was a bonus. But no, I was stoked to get to do the show at home and at the Playhouse, and just in that venue, and especially because we had just been home for the ECMAs, like there was just this string of like special home feeling, and that's a theme in the album, like that feeling of your person being home for you. And I can't really imagine us having done it anywhere else for that first show.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was special performing at the Playhouse. I think we've all performed there, different occasions, and I've performed there with Mike and Tania many times, via Christmas at the Playhouse and other T&B gigs. So it felt like a very comfortable space to be in, which I think was, I think that catered to it being a very special evening, because it felt like home. We were home, in a place that felt great to play in.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, please, Tania.
That's okay. I was just going to say, it did feel like home. It felt like we should make a living room of it. It felt very comfortable.
It did.
Yeah.
Lamps.
Lamps.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to ask, is there a next iteration? What's next for Lighthouse? Might there be more showings? Could there be a tour? More Grej, Mo, Mike, Tania collabs in our future?
I mean, yes, if you are watching us right now and you want Lighthouse, you have my contact information. You now have my YouTube channel. You can.
I'll be adding trumpet to this iteration.
Yeah.
That's good.
I do think that this is a project that would be absolutely amazing to tour in any way, shape, or form. And I do think it's the kind of thing that will keep and can keep evolving. So musically and artistically, it has that really satisfying element to it.
Yeah, I would love to tour with this iteration too. Those 3 days with Mike and Tania were just amazing, and I feel like we were just sort of scratching the surface in how deep we can go with this. And I think the more time we spend together on this project, the deeper we can go into these pieces, and add more of those moments of improvisatory sections, and it'd be great. Let's do it.
Do it. Here. It would be great to see this evolve. Yeah.
And also, I think, you know, it was amazing. I don't know if you guys could speak to this, but after the show, the outpouring of personal stories and emotions that people were feeling after this was something I've never experienced before at a show ever. It was heavy, and I think it just further kind of solidified or validated this this project and this performance, because it really connected with people individually in their own unique way, which I think was really special. And yeah, I just want to keep reaching this to other people and hearing how it's helping them, or how, you know, just hearing their stories and what they felt. Yeah.
I'd love to share one last comment and question from our audience, which both come from Allison. First, I just want to share that Allison writes, as an audience member, I can say I've never had a collective experience of grief like this before. This work is so important and so human. And then a very important follow-up question that I also had, which is, Mike, did we see waves drawn on your score?
There were waves drawn on my score, but I didn't draw them. They were right from Grej. So that's, again, another sort of interpretive, improvisational aspect of this, of the form of this is you have object-based scores. With so was there an indicator? Yeah, there was chords, and then the shapes, the wave shapes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were. And also, you could probably read my notes to myself, calling myself on entrances, and I should take more lessons or something like that. Study more, prepare more.
Those blue waves, yeah.
Yep.
That's that drained my printer ink.
There's a grant line for you.
I meant to print that in black and white, but just
funny.
for you, Mike.
It feels special now.
All blue.
All right.
Maureen, in the last couple of minutes, I wondered if you might like to mention the Ashley Belding Fund and tell folks where they can get more info about it.
Oh, I would love to do that. So this album was inspired by the story of Ashley Belding and Tom Belding. And if you go to ashleybeldingfund.com, you can read more about Ashley. You can learn about her. And there is a scholarship fund that exists and is given out every year to somebody who is a student, a post-secondary student, who is living with cancer and studying. And that is following in the footsteps of what Ashley did. So that is a pretty beautiful story. And yeah, I would love for you to check ashleybeldingfund.com out.
Well, I'd really like to thank our audience for coming, and I would especially like to thank Maureen, Grej, Mike, and Tania for sharing your work with us. And we would also like to gratefully acknowledge the generous support from Factor that brought this concert film to fruition. And stay tuned for the big tour, which hopefully we're announcing soon.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria.
Thank
you, everyone. It's good to see you all.
Cheers, folks.
Bye.